the main points will be the same, just in case some of you were here this morning. I want you to have an early nap. Just appreciate being here and being invited to be here. And Peter actually wrote to me, and I think maybe 3 times in my preaching life, which isn't the whole of my life, I've kind of been asked to preach on this particular theme. And Peter wrote to me and said, "Hey, we're launching this $1 million push." And at first I was kind of like, really, am I the right guy for that, to preach into that? I am known as the offering boy, actually, at Bethel at times. I've been called that a few times. And, I started thinking, what I should preach on them. About a month or so after that, he wrote to me again and said, the 2 themes of our house at the moment are relentless love and paid in full. And I thought, I can do that. That's easy. And so I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about that. And I'll start off just by telling you a story. I think it will translate from where I come from, although I'm confused at times where I come from, actually. Especially when you're in places like this, people say, "Where are you from?" It's like, well, we're Brits, because we don't say that. It's really confusing. And incidentally, I am very happy to be in a country where a cricket is not an insect. The tea is hot. I mean, people ask us in America, do you want hot tea? It's like, no, tea is hot. The nature of it, it's the way it's made. And you've also worked out that bacon has meat on it, which is really important. It's not. So we always feel more at home in places like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and of course the UK. But I made up a story a while ago, and it's about a young girl called Sarah. Sarah's beautiful. She's about 18 years of age, stunningly beautiful girl. So beautiful she could probably have made it as an Australian, But yeah, I've met a few. Some of our best friends are Australian in Reading. Really beautiful girl, and she lived in the family-run hotel. They had been in the family for about 100 years. Her dad owned it. It kind of ended up with him. He was the only child in the family line, so the whole hotel came to him. And it's this beautiful family-run hotel in the southwest of England, and just a perfect location overlooking the ocean. Sarah was raised in that home with one sister, Sally, and her mum and her dad. Sally was the business one of the 2 sisters. Sarah wasn't. Sarah had something else going on inside of her. Sarah just had that edgy thing. She'd had it all of her life. And actually one of her favorite things to do, from as soon as she could walk, she would climb up the stairs onto the 4th floor, and they had a penthouse room there. It's the most expensive room in the hotel. And from 2 years of age or thereabouts, when she could get up those stairs, she would run up there and she'd look out of the window. There was a window seat there. She could climb up onto the window seat. So her favourite thing was when there were no guests in the penthouse room, even though it wasn't good for business, it was always her favourite thing. It had been since she was 2 years of age, and she'd climb up on that seat. And her real favourite thing to do was to go up there with her dad. And she'd often do that even right the way up until she was 18 years of age. Her favourite thing was just to be in that room and to climb up on the window seat, to look out the window, to look at the lighthouse, to look at the ships passing by, to look at the ocean and dream. She was a dreamer. And Sally, her sister, was different. She worked. She was the business girl. She was always to be found working, just like Sarah's mum. And Sarah had a dream. And she's just about to leave school, and it felt like all of the plans were pushing her in this direction of going and studying business, going into the family business. But she just couldn't bring herself to do it. And she had a plan. She had a plan that when her mum and her elder sister were away at the annual hotel conference, that Sarah would manage to sit with her dad and have a chat about her future. And sure enough, the weekend came that the conference was on. And even better was that there was nobody in the penthouse suite that weekend, and so she planned it. She planned that they'd go and sit up there at the window seat and look out at the ocean and talk together. And she had a bottle of her dad's favourite wine up there ready, and And so the end of the evening on the Saturday night, when her mum and her sister were away, they went upstairs and they sat in the window seat. And Sarah just had a plan. She knew that if she had this conversation when her mum and her sister were there, that it wouldn't go well. But, you know, like all beautiful young girls, she was able to flutter her eyelashes at her dad. And she knew that she would probably manage to get her way. And so she sat with him and just said, look, Dad, I'm a dreamer. You know, I've always sat at this window. I've always looked at the lighthouse. I've always looked at the ocean. I've always looked at the ships passing by. And I've always dreamed of going to America and seeing if I could make it, seeing if I could do something with my looks and my talent. And Dad, if it's all right with you, I'd really like to go. I'd really love to go to Hollywood and just see if I can make it, just see if I can get to acting school, see if I can just do something. And it's not that I don't love you, it's not that I don't love this business, but I wasn't made for this business, you know. And although she loved it, she loved being in the hotel, she loved that the guests would come back year in and year out. It was just like this constant holiday of friends and family turning up at the hotel. But she had something inside her and she had to pursue it. And when her mum and sister came back home from the conference, the decision was all but made, really, and there was going to be no persuading and no change of mind. And Dad was in on it anyway. And so eventually the day came, she finished school, and Sarah went to the airport, said her goodbyes, and got on a plane and went to Hollywood. And she began to see if she could make it. At first she kept in touch with home, but over time, you know, she started to get a little bit embarrassed. Her dream wasn't quite making it, and she did a bit of acting school, but she was like loads of people there. She was always between jobs, waiting on tables and such like. A little bit of time went by, and she got introduced to the famous casting room couch, and before she knew it, she was doing what she shouldn't do to try and get parts in movies and such like, or modelling. And over time, that casting room couch, even that, didn't seem to be making any difference, and her whole lifestyle by now had completely changed. She found herself with different men night after night, and as the money ran out, it was just a convenient way of finding a meal and somewhere to sleep for a night. And weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. And before she knew it, she had no money, and the meals out with boys to have somewhere to sleep turned into a life of prostitution, and she was literally selling herself just for meals and for her life. And then the horror of horrors, the worst possible scenario that she could ever have imagined, she found that she was pregnant. She's now pregnant, she's got no money, and now nobody wants to know her, not for any reason. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with Sarah. She's completely lost touch with home. She'd sent a few emails here and there. For some reason, email addresses had changed, and she just couldn't get in touch with home. So now she's living in a shelter. She's pregnant. She's alone. She's scared. And then one morning she came downstairs, and she hadn't realised it, but it was about 2 weeks before Mother's Day, and she came downstairs for breakfast in the hostel, and there was a table set up. A local church group had set up a table, and the whole purpose of this church group was to put these, women that were living on the streets and sleeping rough, to try and put them in touch with family. And so Sarah saw all the display, and she thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. Maybe, just maybe, somebody could find a way of getting in touch with my mum. I don't really know why I can't get in touch with her. I can't work out why none of the emails get answered. And anyway, Mum would be much better. If I could get in touch with Mum, I couldn't possibly get in touch with Dad. I'm going to break his heart. But Mum, she might be able to help me. She's the businesswoman. She'd be able to sort out some things. And so, sure enough, it happened that they managed to get hold of Mum. And so Sarah wrote an email home to Mum and said, look, Mum, I'm in a complete mess. Would you just help me? Would you send an airfare? Would you book me some tickets? I've just got to come home. But I don't know what to do about that. I don't know what to say to Dad. But if you could just book me some tickets. And look, Mum, I'm really sorry, but I've got myself pregnant, and I need you to help me to get an abortion when I get home. And if you can do that, if you can meet me near the airport and just arrange for an abortion before I go home, Dad can't possibly see me in this condition. And And so, sure enough, Mum replied, and she did what Mum did. She's an amazing businesswoman, and she organised all the tickets and everything like that, and everything was settled. And Sarah got on the plane. It was a strange experience for Sarah on the plane because she'd actually changed her name while she'd been there. She changed her name to Francine, and she thought it was a kind of cool name, but over time she ended up being called Frankie. And, you know, she didn't really almost know who she was anymore. But to get on a plane, she had to be Sarah again because she had to use her passport. And so it was this strange experience of everybody calling her Sarah on the plane. She's exhausted, and in a way, the most comfortable place she'd been for many months was the seat on the plane as she flew home. She got off the plane, and there was Mum. Mum was there to greet her. She knew she could rely on Mum, and Mum hugged her and welcomed her back home. And they got in the car, and they drove into a local hospital. And when they got there, Sarah said, "Look, this doesn't look like what I asked you. I thought you were going to take me to an abortion clinic." And Mum said, "No, I'm not taking you to an abortion clinic. You're carrying our grandchild. It doesn't matter to us what happened to you, but this is our grandchild. And you don't have an abortion. I'm taking you to the hospital. I want you to get a checkup. I want to make sure that everything's okay. And I want to start the process of you getting the right care." And so that happened. And then from there, they went to a spa, and her mum said, "Look, we're going to stay here for a few days. We're just going to get you cleaned up. We're going to get manicures and pedicures. We're just going to spend some time reconnecting, and we'll go out shopping. We'll buy you some maternity clothes." And so they had these 2 or 3 days of just reconnecting, and Sarah just being loved on and cared for. And then the time came for them to get in the car and to drive down to the West Country and to go home. And to be honest, Sarah was nervous. She was worried, what would Dad think? And she let him down. She badly let her dad down. She knew she was the apple of his eye. They drove home. They got to the hotel, and the first person there to greet her was her dad. He almost ran out to the car. He couldn't open the door quick enough, and he took her by the hand, and they walked into the hotel. And they walked up the first flight of stairs, and they were chatting, and they walked up the second flight of stairs, and then the third flight of stairs, and they stood at the bottom of the flight of stairs that led up to the penthouse room. The penthouse room that everyone had always called Sarah's room. And her dad looked at her and said, "Sarah, I haven't walked up these stairs for the 5 years you've been away. I couldn't bring myself to walk up to our room. But today I'm going to walk up there with you." And so he took her by the hand, and they walked up the stairs. They stood for a moment outside the door of the room now that had Sarah's room written beautifully on the door. He opened the door and he let Sarah go in. Sarah couldn't believe her eyes. The window seat was still there, her favourite seat, but the rest of the room was completely changed. The rest of the room was a nursery. There was a room for her, and a beautiful bed, and a nursery for the baby, and a sitting area. She couldn't believe it. She sat in the window seat. She put her head on her dad's shoulder, and they just sat there for a moment quietly. And then her dad said to her, "Look, Sarah, we need to go downstairs. There's something else I need to show you." And so together they walked downstairs, and as they got downstairs, there was the sound of a party going on. And they went into the ballroom of the hotel, and sure enough, there was a party going on. And all the guests that Sarah knew best from the years in the hotel were there at the party, but it wasn't just any party, it was a baby shower. And all the guests that Sarah knew well were there at the baby shower. And Sarah walked in, and everyone was excited to see her. And they loved on her and gave her gifts. But as Sarah looked around, she knew that there was something wrong. And her dad did too. And her dad looked at Sarah and said, "Just wait there. I'll be right back." Dad went out because he was looking for Sally. He knew though where she'd be. And he found her. He went and found her. Sally was always in the same place. She was always in that office behind the reception running the business. She was always doing the books or doing something. And Dad went and found Sally. He said, "Sally, why aren't you in the party? Why didn't you join us? Why didn't you come?" Sally looked at her dad and said, "You don't really know me, Dad, do you, it seems?" Dad said, "What do you mean?" Sally said, well, let's just go for a walk. And they walked around the grounds of the hotel. And Sally said, look, I know my sister's home, and I know it's great that she's home. And I know that you used to sit upstairs in the window seat in the penthouse suite. I know all of that, but Dad, I wish you knew that this seat here in the corner of the garden, this is the seat where I dream. This is the seat where I've always been and dreamed. And her dad looked at her and said, Sally, I wish I'd known. I wish I'd known that that's where you came and dreamed all the time. Because if I'd known that, I would have come and dreamed with you. I'd have sat with you, Sally, because, you are the future of this hotel. This hotel's never really been Sarah's hotel. She wasn't born to run a hotel, but you were born for it. You were born for this to be yours. And Sally, you just need to know. You just need to know that everything I have is yours. And you've always been with me all the time. I just wish you told me that this is the seat where you would sit and dream. By now you know the story. Mm-hmm. It's the most beautiful story in the Bible. I just messed around with it a little bit. I fell in love with Luke 15. I've always liked it, but I fell in love with it 4 years ago. I fell head over heels in love with the gospel because as Peter said, I had this crazy word. Sunday night in February 2012, Manwaring told me, Paul, you will do, he said, crusades. We don't really like the word crusades, especially not in Europe. It's not really a good title. But he said that I would do crusades, large events. I'd see many people won for Jesus, accompanied by signs, wonders, and miracles. As a result of that, a number of things that happened, not least that Bill got behind me and started sending me up on stage on Sundays. And it didn't matter whether it was offering or announcements. He'd sometimes say to me, I think you should do an altar call. I didn't really know what I was doing, to be honest. I've since discovered that about 75% of pastors don't know how to do an altar call. And actually, it's not even a joke. It's really quite tragic, It kind of makes you wonder what's the point of gathering a whole bunch of people if we don't actually lead them to Jesus. It's a little worrying. But anyway, I started doing that, and then about May of that year, 2012, Reinhard Bonnke called Bill and said, hey, I'm starting a school of evangelism. I'd like you to send your 10 best young evangelists to my school. And Bill looked at me and said, and you're one of them. To which I said, I'm not one of your 10, your best, your young, or your evangelists. I failed. But I ended up going to Reinhard Bonnke's School of Evangelism for a week that completely changed my life. That completely and utterly changed my life. And on the Tuesday morning of that week, I sat and listened to Reinhard Bonnke preach The Woman Caught in Adultery. There's only two people in my view that preach that message, Bill Johnson and Reinhard Bonnke. The rest are trying, but those two. When Bill says that's a father-daughter moment, he wrecks me every time on that. And as Reinhard Bonnke preached that day, I began to cry, and I cried, and I now know why I cried. I cried because I fell in love with the gospel. And it wasn't that I hadn't been saved before. I just fell in love with the gospel. I've changed my language since then. I used to talk about, reading the Bible, quoting scripture and loving the word, and now I just say it's the gospel. In fact, if you don't preach the gospel, I'm not sure why you bother, because it's good news. So why would we preach anything but good news? And it was a week that completely changed my life. That evening, I got back to my hotel room on the Tuesday, and I laid on my bed and I said, God, if you want me to preach the gospel, you need to give me my story. I need my story. And he said to me as clear as I've really ever heard him, he said, it's Luke 15. I had a little moan, as sometimes you do with God. The moan was basically, come on, God, I want the cleverer message than that. I want the one that nobody else has remembered. Something that I pulled out of, nowhere and preach on it. I laid on my bed and I read Luke 15. I scribbled in my Bible as I read it differently than I'd ever read it before in my life. It was alive. It is alive. I was actually thinking during worship tonight, I don't even think about Luke 15 the same. It's almost like I can see it. It's like I see it in my mind's eye. Partly because I've shared it so many times, but I can just see it, And the week continued. And, on the Friday of that week, I heard Daniel Calendar preach, and he gave this incredible advice. It was just beautiful. It was in the middle of the preach. I may be the only person who actually remembers this piece. The preach was genius. But he said, in an age when there are a lot of prophets giving prophetic words, you must never forget to pay attention to the still small voice of God. It's a profound truth. And I got on the plane that Friday night and I reviewed the still small voice experiences of my life. And I discovered something that I'd shared every one of them in different contexts, but I'd never put them together. And that night I realized that all three of them were linked by one thing: evangelism and the gospel. And I won't go into all the details. I shared more of it this morning in that respect. But I made commitments during that week that I would always preach. Wherever I went, I would preach from Luke chapter 15. Not the only message I do. I actually wasn't planning to do it here. I was planning to respond to Peter saying, we're starting this push for another $1 million for this year. But then the second email came and I realized it's just Luke 15. You're a Luke 15 house. Relentless love, paid in full. It's who you are. And I just began to think through how would I apply this message, the message that I love so much, to this. And I have made that commitment, and certainly whenever I am invited to preach the gospel in any form of evangelistic type event, it's always going to start with Luke 15. I was privileged to be in Nuremberg with one of the sons of this country and this house, really, Ben Fitzgerald, and Awakening Europe. My first ever crusade, which Bill thinks is hilarious, was 25,000 people with Ben Fitzgerald. And I got to preach to a nation, to Germany on a Sunday afternoon. And I knew that the only thing that I would do was to teach out of Luke chapter 15. The incredible thing is that Germany is the fatherland. I got to preach about the Father's house in the fatherland. And to remind a nation that they are the fatherland, to remind a nation that their assignment on this earth is to build the Father's house in the fatherland. See, my story, the hotel, I'm sure I could paint more and more of that picture, but the point is, it's about creating a house. It's about building the Father's house. And the point with Sarah is that was the house that she could come home to, the Father's house, where she would be loved and welcomed and believed in, where she would be considered worthy and valuable and trusted. And that's what we all need, isn't it? That's what we all want to find. For me, when I was standing looking out of the crowd in Germany, a nation that's been so hurt and so damaged by obviously the reputation that came because of war, but they shouldn't have that reputation forever. They mustn't be famous for that forever. They have to be famous for the things that are much more important. And I had a moment while I was there, and I'd never prepared it, that I grabbed hold of my Bible on the stage. It was a little bit gusty wind blowing around the stage. I couldn't use my notes. It doesn't really matter to me much anyway most of the time. My Bible wouldn't stay open, and I just turned as I was preaching there, and I turned and I grabbed my Bible and I said, Germany, your identity is not in war. Your identity is in the gospel. You printed it first. They're the fatherland. We live in extraordinary days. We truly do live in extraordinary days, and I believe that what you're pursuing here is a part of that. You see, the story of Luke 15, this incredible story. Jesus told a story because he's seen the Father. You and I, we make up stories. We try and imagine, and we go from earth to heaven, but he went from heaven to earth. He painted this picture, this incredible picture of the Father. I could teach on it for a long time, to be honest, out of Luke 15, but there are some parts of it. There's one part I felt that I should emphasize tonight differently than I emphasized this morning. You see, when the boy comes back in the story, Luke 15, and just the same as Sarah came back, there's a very, very significant moment. I believe it's a moment that we all need to experience. And that is that the Father bore our shame. See, when the boy in Luke 15 came home, the father ran. A guy called Kenneth Bailey believes that the father ran to get to the boy before the villagers got to the boy. The villagers were allowed to shame that boy out of the village in the culture of the day. A ceremony called the Kazazar ceremony, where they would take a large clay pot and smash that clay pot in front of the boy, and they would shame him out of the village. That's what they were allowed to do, because he brought shame on the village. And Bailey, who's a man who lived in the Middle East, written a number of books, he believes that the father ran to get to the boy before the villagers did. This is extraordinary. I believe this is such an incredible picture of what we're meant to build, the houses that we're meant to build on earth. We're meant to build houses where people can come into them and not experience shame. See, the father ran to get to the boy before the villagers could shame him out of the village. The only person who could undo the work of the villagers is the father. It's the only one. He's the only one who is able to say, no, stop that. This is my son. And the father ran to the boy. And the way I imagine it, and I always imagine it, and again I can almost see it and I can feel something, is, there's the boy, and the father runs to the boy, and the villagers are behind him with a large clay pot, and they start to smash that clay pot, and shards of that clay pot start to hit the back of the father's bare legs, that middle-aged Middle Eastern man with his robe held up, and those shards of pot starting to cut into the back of his legs, but he can't feel them because he's hugging his son. There's a whole world out there that wants to shame people. There's a whole world that wants to find reasons to shame people. And the call on our lives is to build houses where we don't shame people, where we allow the Father to get to them before the world gets to them.
That's good.
It is.
One of the great challenges, I think, of life today is shame. But the Father bore our sorrows and our shame. The father ran. He got to the boy first. I don't know whether your mind can go as far as this, but when they made a whip to beat Jesus with, they probably picked up pieces of clay pots that had been used in shaming ceremony and wove them into the whip. And those pieces of clay were actually probably used, in my mind's eye, to whip the back of Jesus, who bore our shame. I first got really introduced to shame in a personal way when I had prostate cancer. I'm diagnosed with prostate cancer, and the first thought that I had was, I'll be less of a man after my surgery. Many people suffer the same thought with disease and sickness, breast cancer, uterine cancer. Women who go through the menopause, that the enemy wants to tell you you'll be less of a woman, less of a man after that. You see, shame is anything that tells you that you are less than you were created to be. Shame will tell you who you're not, and it will keep you from the one voice that alone can tell you who you are. And the father bore the boy's shame. He welcomed that boy home, and he bore his shame. The father in my hotel story bore Sarah's shame. He was willing for everyone to see that his daughter had got pregnant out there on the streets of Hollywood, but he was going to welcome her home. He wasn't covering her up. He wasn't doing away with the baby and having an abortion. He was going to welcome her home, and what's more, celebrate her and make sure that everybody that cared about her was there to celebrate her. I started to come across different versions of shame in my life. Of course, a big one, a huge one was, I'm a pastor in a church that people travel all over the world to get healed, and I have prostate cancer and I don't get healed by prayer. Shame starts to kick in. I had somebody sit next to me, I could almost feel the moment, who sat next to me at a meal and said, you know your cancer was caused by your diet. It's like, they hadn't eaten one meal with me. How they had the right to say that, but people chuck this stuff around. People will say that it's, inner healing stuff, you've got forgiveness going on. Okay, sometimes that's true, but people will want to try and shame you. I started to feel this shame thing around me. I started to notice, though, that it wasn't isolated to me. I started to see that so many people experience shame. They experience shame for so many different reasons. People experience shame because of the colour of their skin, the side of the town they live, the car they drive, the house they live in. Some people experience shame because they look in the mirror and they don't feel as beautiful as someone else. Some eating disorders are caused by that. that one of the ultimate effects of shame is actually suicide. Shame will tell you who you're not and keep you from the one voice that alone can tell you who you are. Shame's been there since the world began. Where Adam ate of the fruit and he's hiding. And God says, where are you, Adam? God knew where Adam was. It's Adam who didn't know where Adam was. One of my favourite phrases in the Bible where God says, who told you you were naked? So many of us are walking around with a voice in our heads telling us something. Telling us this or telling us that. I'm starting to see it everywhere. One of my favourite moments was one Sunday morning. I was in the prayer meeting and Danny was preaching that Sunday morning. There was 7 o'clock prayer meeting. At the end of it, Danny said to me, Paul, would you close my preach? It was an unusual request. I'd watched Danny several times have Sherry come up and close a preach. And he actually said to me, he said, I want you to do it the way Sherry does it. I want you to come up and close it. He said, I don't want you to lead the ministry time. I want you to do the last 10 minutes of my preach. So, well, what are you preaching on? He said, I'm preaching on shame. So why do you want me to do the last 10 minutes? He said, because I want you to do that thing you do about shame. I've seen you do that. It's like, sure, if that's what you want me to do. I felt very honoured. I felt humbled. Danny's preaching on shame. And he wants me to come up and minister into shame. So he called me up. I came up. Now, whenever Danny and Sherry had done their closing thing like this, they stayed on the stage, on the platform. I came up and Danny goes and sits down next to Sherry. I was like, well, I wasn't expecting that. I started talking like I'm talking to you now. I talked about shame, about the causes of shame, about the prostate cancer, being less of a man, about the many different experiences of shame that people have. And then I said, anybody that's engaging with what I've just said, anyone that's feeling something of shame the way I've just described it, would you stand? The first person to stand is Danny. I'm looking down, I'm thinking, I don't know what's going on, but you set me up. Because you just preached on something that you wanted to respond to, so you got me to do the altar call. It was strange, but it was humbling. I later discovered it was the pain and the shame of his son not doing very well and not walking very well with the Lord at that season of his life. And he was feeling that. I meet many leaders who have the same experience. I think one of the hardest things for a church leader to do is to lead a church into the supernatural, into healing when they've got a family member who's sick, or to call back the prodigals when one of their kids isn't walking with the Lord. It's a really tough place to be. And Danny was in that place and he asked me to minister that way. It was a humbling moment, but it was a moment when I realized that ministering into shame is something that I am privileged to get to do, that I had revealed to me, as it were, this experience because of my prostate cancer season of what this thing called shame is. You see, shame will tell you who you're not. It will keep you like Cinderella from the one voice that can tell you who you are. You're thinking, Cinderella? Which verse in the Bible is that? You know the fairy stories are really journeys into the soul. That's what they really are. Cinderella, her identity is she's the maid of the ashes, Cinderella. That's her name. The wicked stepsisters, what do? They named her Maid of the Ashes, you're Cinderella. And not only that, they keep her from the Father. You're not allowed to speak to the Father. And then, of course, the great day comes when the Holy Spirit, or the fairy godmother comes, and takes her to the ball. And she discovers who she really is, you see, because shame will tell you who you're not. It'll say you're Cinderella, you're this, you're dust, you're worthless, you're worth nothing. And you're not allowed access to the Father. When you get access to the Father's able to tell you who you are. And of course, what happened with Cinderella is she discovers who she is. She's the princess. She's the belle of the ball. She was born to have a prince on her arm. See, shame will tell you what you're not. The father bore your shame. That's why he ran in that incredible story. And Sarah, I'm sure, was not expecting in my story to come home and to discover that the penthouse suite, the most expensive room in the hotel, had now been completely turned over to her. It became Sarah's room. No shame in that house. No shame in that family. And if I've said anything in these last few minutes, and you feel like that's me, I experienced that. I have this shame. I feel shame. that my job, what I do for a living, isn't quite as valuable or as important as someone else, and where I live, the car I drive, the house that I live in. Or maybe it's through cancer or something like that. Whatever it is, if there's anything that is telling you that you are less than you were created to be, that you're walking in a degree of shame, then I want to invite you to stand. You know, the really good news with this is you dealt with it by standing. Because shame is destroyed by authenticity. You don't need, and I'm a fan of inner healing, but you don't need a long session for shame. Standing up deals with it. Yeah. Because shame is destroyed by authenticity. That's why God said, Adam, where are you? Who told you were naked? As long as Adam can step out from the shadow and see the Father, shame is undone. So your shame is being dealt with. Some of you actually felt and experienced a pressure of, what if I stand up? What will the people next to me think? That's a version of shame. Shame of being worried about what people might think about you. So the good news is you just dealt with your shame, but there is better news. Because the Bible says, instead of shame, a double portion.
Glory.
I really believe that this is extraordinary.
That's right.
It took me a while to work out what I thought it might mean. Now, I don't have any theological qualifications in this area, so this is just my interpretation. But there is a psychological principle of projection. What it means is this, that if I feel something about me, I will project onto you that you think that about me. So if I'm standing up here tonight and I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure this congregation think I should be Bill Johnson. They'd rather Bill Johnson than me. What will happen is, I'll try and give you Bill Johnson. Alright? Which means you won't get Bill Johnson, you won't get me. That's what we do all the time when we project onto other people what we think about ourselves. We literally project and we go, okay, I'll try and be Bill. Because I think they want Bill, I'll try and be Bill. I'll be a really bad Bill and you won't get me. We do it all the time. Husbands do it with wives. If I don't think I'm the best husband to my wife, I will project onto her that she doesn't think I'm the best husband. And I'll end up with a messed up marriage. But you see, instead of shame, a double portion. So here's what happens. When you stop experiencing shame, you'll stop projecting onto someone else and think that they think that about you. I do believe that it is related to some eating disorder stuff. Not all, but some. So here's what happens once you deal with shame. I get more of you and you get more of me. Not only that, you get more of God and he gets more of you because you will project onto God your shame.
That's good.
You'll project onto him that what you think about you is what he thinks about you and therefore you won't give him all of you. So just receive your double portion.
Yeah, that's good.
It's a double portion for you. It's a double portion. Some of you are going to have your marriages improved just because of this one thing, because you will stop projecting onto your spouse that you are not the best husband for your spouse, or vice versa. So Father, I ask right now that you would release the double portion.
Yeah, more God.
Release the double portion. In Jesus' name.
To your glory.
Amen.
Amen.
You may be seated. And so to wrap up, what's this message got to do with what you're doing right now? What's this message got to do with paying off your debt so that you are free to give more generously? What's this message got to do? Well, it's very simple to me. Luke 15 is the story of relentless love and paid in full. Do you notice nobody asked for their money back? The dad didn't say, hey, you owe me some money. You wasted the family money. You need to pay for the 3 days in the spa. You need to pay for this. You need to pay for the penthouse room to be converted to the nursery. The father in Luke 15 didn't say, hey, I need my money back. No, quite the opposite. There's the ring, the sandal, the robe on the back, the party. It's paid in full. The kingdom economy is a paid in full economy.
Yeah.
Sarah was all paid in full. Here's my challenge to you. There are two people in this story. There's Sarah and Sally. There's Sarah. She messes up her life and she comes home. And she receives all of the love. She receives, as it were, the ring on her finger, the robe on her back, the shoes on her feet, and the party. It looked a little different in my story. The story in Luke 15, he comes home, there's a ring on his finger. The ring is trust. The ring is the credit card for the family business. The robe is to say, hey, you are worthy. You're worthy of being seen as being my son. The sandal on the feet is you are a son, because the sandal is the symbol of sonship. And the party is a party where everyone from the village is invited. My challenge is this. If you experienced that, what would you want to do with it? How would you live the rest of your life if you'd experienced that? I believe you'd want to build that house again and again and again and again. You'd want to be a part of building houses that welcome people in, shame-free. You'd want to be building houses where the lost and broken people of this world can run and have rings on their fingers, shoes on their feet, robes on their back, and have parties and celebrations for them. That's how you'd want to live, isn't it? You'd live that way. You'd live generously. You'd live extravagantly. You'd live to build houses where your experience could get reproduced for everyone else. But the other character in the story is the elder brother in Luke 15, or the elder sister in my story. Sally, the elder sister. Now, I believe that many people in the church are like the elder brother, the Sally. In fact, when I read Luke 15 in my hospital room in September 2012, I got to that bit of the story. I heard the father say to me, "You're an elder brother." My first response was, "Not me, God, surely not me. I don't want to be the elder brother." But I began to see that I was. You see, the elder brother mindset struggles to see the youngster come home. It happens in churches all the time. There's those of us that have been working hard in the church. I call them the group that has showed up and stayed up. They're the ones in the video who were there setting up that school hall and tearing down that school hall and working hard and being the pillars of society and the pillars of the church. And then the youngsters come home. As I humorously like to say, they go to the city, they waste everything, and then they come to their right mind, they come to their senses, and they come home. And they show up at home and they've got, sleeves full of tattoos. They're covered in them. They've got piercings you can drive small cars through. And they get a microphone in their hand and they preach one time, and somehow people get saved and people get healed. And us elder brothers are looking and going, "That's just not fair." That happens. The cure for the elder brother is the whisper of the Father. The whisper of the Father in the ear that says, "I've always been with you. Everything I have is yours." You see, whether you're Sarah coming home or you're Sally having the Father whisper in your ear, my challenge to you is, how would you live? How would you live with those two experiences? I believe you live and you want to reproduce the Father's house. You live extravagantly, generously. You want everyone to experience the welcome home. And the Sally, how would you live? If you finally heard that everything is yours, how would you live? You'd live with no limits. You'd remove the lid from your life. You'd realize everything I have is yours, is what the Father said. I've started to step into that more and more. I have been that elder brother. I really have. I've often tried to work out, hey, how come I started the healing rooms and the next guy that runs it, which happens to be Joaquin, that you know, it goes through the roof. I started that thing. I was really diligent. I worked hard. I was like on my 6th day a week of work. I did that elder brother thing. But I'm getting healed up from it. I'm realizing that the Father said to me, everything I have is yours. There's absolutely no reason why I can't walk in the same signs, wonders, and miracles as the people I've looked at, criticized, and questioned. See, the challenge that Peter's laying out to you here is to look to a future and live different. Now, I think if you experience that kind of Father's love, you really would want to reproduce this house all over the world. Yeah, not a building. Do you know what I mean? You want to extend the love, the forgiveness, the welcome, the trust, the worthiness to everyone that you meet. It's what this world needs. It needs the Father's house. I think it's one of the great tragedies of the Christian church that we've told a couple of stories completely wrong. We told the world the story of the prodigal son, and we should have told the world the story of the extravagant father. And we told the world that there's a judgment day coming. And judgment day isn't in my book. It's deliverance day. Judgment day is written between the verses by the people who put the Bible together, the same as prodigal son is written between the verses. They're probably the two most important messages that we can tell the world, that there's an extravagant father and that there's a deliverance day, not a judgment day. And even if we do want to talk about judgment, he's going to judge for us like Simon Cowell, not judge against us. The goal is to find the winner, not find the losers. How will you live? How will you live knowing that you've experienced the Father's love and affection? How will you live knowing that the Father was prepared to run out, to hitch up his robe? A middle-aged Middle Eastern man was prepared to break the rules. How will you live? How will you live knowing that? Or how will you live as the elder brother or the Sally? How will you live knowing that the Father broke the rules to come out into the field or to come and find you in the reception? He broke the rules because he never should have left the guests at the banqueting table alone. He broke the rules for the elder brother and he broke the rules for the younger brother. How will you live if you've experienced that? You'll live generously. You'll live extravagantly. You'll want the whole world to experience that love, that acceptance. You'll live differently because you'll take the lid off. You'll live limitless. You'll live dreaming. You'll live pushing the boundaries of your life. And I'm not saying I've got it all right, but that prophetic word in 2012 changed me forever. Changed the entire destiny of my life.
Yeah.
Because somehow, through Murray Ungarillo, that Sunday night, I heard the Father say, everything I have is yours.
Yeah,
I've always been with you. I invite you to stand.
Oh, wow.
Bless you, guys.
I think it was Francis Schaeffer who